Yes, this is Foot Soldiers, the movie. And what I'm doing is kind of giving my explanation of what happens in each scene. Um, so it opens with it's a sunny day in the city, and you see an aerial shot of downtown Los Angeles. And then as you go past that, you see a shot of James, the mentor, his car driving down the street. You see a shot through the sunroof. You see him, listening to the music and just, happy. And the car is rolling down the street through the neighborhood. The credits also roll the title and so on and so forth at this time. You see people walking down the street. Uh, then as you see him riding through the city, you see him ride through a neighborhood, and there's some kids playing in the playground. And then there's some boys, they're kind of wrestling, and it might look like they're fighting, but they're friends in front of in maybe the basketball court or otherwise, and it looks like they're fighting. So when he gets in front of him, he blows his horn, and they stop and they holler at him like, "Hey, what's up?" Or you don't hear him say anything. They begin to walk towards his car. It makes it kind of look kind of intimidating, and so he pulls off. And one of the boys that doing this is Robert the mentee. And so he pulls off and he continues to ride through the street on his way home. And then his cell phone rings. And that's his wife calling, talking about she's not at home, so on and so forth. And then he gets to his house, and you see the car pull up in his driveway. You see the wheels roll. You see the front of the house. The house, the yard is nicely put together. There's a Black Lives Matter sign in the window. It's a nice, beautiful, sunny day. And so he goes into the house, and you see him walking in the door. The house is, nice and clean, good decor. Goes in and he checks his mail. He goes in the bedroom, he changes clothes. He goes back into the kitchen, he gets a beer and something to snack on, and then the house phone rings. And it's the police calling him about the car accident. And so he's so crazy about what has happened, he takes the beer, he throws it up against the wall, and then he grabs his keys, he runs out the door, and he gets in his car and he takes off real fast. He, almost hits the bushes and the curb on his way to the hospital. And then he calls his friend Philip on his telephone. You hear that conversation. And then you fade to the mentee, and you see the apartment building he lives in, a little small apartment building. You see inside the house, the kitchens, the appliances, mom sitting there doing some reading in her clothes. They got an older brother, he's laying on the couch looking kind of lazy, and a young brother and sister playing in the living room. And so that's how you introduce the mom and the kids. And then you see Robert, the mentee. So you see him walking into the front door of the apartment, going into from the front door. He goes into his apartment. You see him opening the door, and he takes a pause before he goes in the apartment. It's kind of hectic in there. And so when he gets in, he tosses his book bag in the corner. Mom kind of gets on him for being a little late from school, about 7:00. He says hi to his brother and his sister. And so she's on him a little bit, makes him do the dishes, or at least do his dish, because the kitchen is clean. And then you go back to James, the mentor's house, and now it's after the repast. of his wife and stepson's funeral, and he's looking at the obituaries. He even, this is just the end of it. It's just a few people that have come by, and he puts on his wife's company T-shirt, and it's a slow walk down the hallway to greet the remaining guests. And, some gospel music is playing, and his brothers and sisters greet him, coming out, and they still hugging him and loving on him and that kind of thing. And then his uncle comes up from the living room with the family. They're the last one left except brothers and sisters. And his uncle, he even gives him $100 bill. Then, like I said, there's a few people left at the funeral. The young man who died, the stepson, his friends are still there, and they all shake hands and so on and so forth. And April is there, and there's a little talk at that point. And then they go back to Robert. Robert is at school, and he's beating up this kid. And he's on top of him, punching, you see blood and stuff like that. It's a classroom of people, students around him, kind of, how they do, they hover around the fight. A teacher clears the path, a security guard comes in, he pushes Robert off the boy. And, he kind of, Robert is on him, so he has to push him off pretty tough, pretty hard. Then he puts him in the headlock, and then he grabs his arms, and he takes him off to the principal's office. And so then the next scene you show him walking in the principal's office, and he's sitting there at the desk, and she's just so disappointed in him. And she tells him, "Hey man, I'm kicking you out of here." And then she, takes him to another room, an empty room, and makes him sit there. And that's kind of the end of that scene. And then you go back to Robert's house, and he's just sitting there and just kind of chilling by himself. Probably a couple of weeks have gone by, and then one of his coworkers and her friend stops by just to check on him, see how he's doing. And he had missed not a couple of weeks, about 3 months have gone by because he's missed work that long, and they were just wondering how he was doing since all this transpired. They even take a picture with him, the one young lady, to see, show other people he's doing all right. And then he's at his house. It's actually that same room, that same evening, and his best friend Philip comes over, and just to chit chat, sit with him. They get a beer, and they do some talking. And Robert at this point has got his Bible, and he asked his best friend to go to church with him, but he says, "No, I can't go because I'm playing golf." And so the next day, Robert is at church. You see him in the church building. The service is ended, and Robert is sitting there alone, just looking and thinking and praying and stuff like that. And a few remaining people come up to him and they hug him. And then the pastor comes and he sits beside him, and they talk, and they, go over, and have prayer and whatnot. And then now you're back at the youth home. But not back at it. You're at the youth home for the first time, and Robert's mother is there to, check the place out and see what's going to happen with her son. And so she, does the paperwork, and he has to go there. I mean, it's no choice about it. And so the youth home director is just trying to figure out, hey, what's wrong with this kid? He gets good grades, but all this fighting is a little vicious. And so she leaves, and she looks back at the building, and she knows that things have changed for her son because of his actions. And it's a slow walk away. And she's really contemplating, but her hands are tied. And then you go from there, you go back to the James house, and he and his buddy Philip is coming by, and from doing some work, seeing one of his clients. His buddy owns a plumbing business, and now you begin to see a little bit of Robert, doing some drinking, a little early in the morning too, actually. And they do just some normal talking about things, and even flipping the house to make some money. And Robert drinks a couple times. And at this point, Robert, James has kind of been talking to some people about volunteering at the youth home. And like I say, it's about 3-4 months later since the funeral, and he's looking for something to do, with his time. But his buddy Philip, is not really for it. He says, "Hey, man, just buy raffle tickets and donate some money." But I think at this point he's thinking about it. James is about being a mentor, and then you see Robert at the youth home, probably one of the early days that he's just got there. And Robert has a journal that he writes in, and this is the first instance where you see him writing in his journal about his life and his life circumstance. Then you go from there to James and his sister get together at this coffee shop, and they talk. Sister talks about getting and being up for promotions, and James, is excited for her. And then he tells her about his ideal and plans of becoming a mentor at the place. And then you go back to the youth home where you see some guards fighting. So you see the boys fighting, and just give you some atmosphere of what the youth home. But I mean, they ain't a bad fight. They boys being boys. That's kind of how I envision that. And then you go to James' house, and you see him, just a reflection of him sitting there looking at some pictures. He's by himself, and he's doing some drinking. He's drinking from that thermo. That thermo is big, and he's walking around, and you can see he's still very, very sad about all this. Then you go back to the youth home, and this is where James comes in. He's in a suit, coming in from work, and he goes in the youth home. He's looking over. He slowly grabs the door handle, walks inside, stares at office sign, and this is where he meets Bubba, the white guy, the assistant youth home director, for the first time. And then he goes from there, and he has to he questions Bubba for being a white guy in this situation. But he walks out the door, and he has filled out the application, and that's it. They shake hands, and James leaves. Then that same day, James is at home, and Philip, his best buddy, comes over, and they do some light talking. He tells him that he just left the youth home, and he's thinking that he's not going to do it. And then he's in his backyard, and he's sitting there, and he's reading a book. And this is like a couple of days later or something like that. And it's a Bubba calling him, and he's telling him, "Hey, you've been approved to be a mentor." When James says, "Hey, I decided not to do it, and if I think I will, I'll call you back." And then that night, him and Philip are talking at the house, and making some plans about, like, say, flipping the house. And Philip says, "Hey, man, you ain't saying nothing about the mentorship change." James says, "The guy's been calling me, but I told him I wouldn't do it." But James still on the fence. Then they're at the youth home, and James arrives. He's been he's getting these calls. He's still a little anxious. He's checking it out. And when he pulls up to the youth home, Robert walks past, and Robert, the mentee, says, "You a lawyer or something like that? You're in the suit." And he says, "No, I'm a chemical engineer, and I'm thinking about volunteering here." And so he goes in, he talks to Bubba, and this is where he meets Robert, the mentee, for the first time. And so they talk. Robert, the mentee, says, "I don't want to have nothing to do with this," and so on and so forth. And then they go from there to Vern, who is the white guy, assistant youth home director. Vern is the director, older guy, and Vern is, not so much for this mentorship program. And he says, "Hey man, if this guy don't, you check him out good." He says, "Yeah, I checked him out." He says, "But we've had some problems with the program, and if this one don't work out, we're gonna have to shut it down." And then you see Robert walking through the hall. He ends up running into one of his buddies, and he sits there, and his buddy says, "Hey, what was that all about?" And he says, "It's about a mentor for me." And the buddy says, "Hey, I want a mentor." And he says, "Well, maybe you can have him." But then Robert is sitting at his desk, and he's really contemplating how this all happened in his life. And then James is at home, and he talks to his sisters, tells her he's still not sure about doing it, but he did meet the kid, and he's got a little, affection for him already. He sees something in the kid, a little something that, he can't shake in his head. And then a little time goes by in there at the youth home, and James shows up, for the first meeting. And Robert says, "Hey, I ain't have nothing to do with it." And he walks away. And then James is in his kitchen by himself after this. And he's, looking for something to eat in the refrigerator. Couldn't find anything. He's a man, and, the wife did all the house stuff. So he gets in his car, he drives off, and he runs into Robert. And Robert is like, "Yo, man, how you running into me like that?" And he says, "You stalking me?" He says, "No, I'm going down the street, just having to run into you." So they, Robert gets in the car, they talk a little bit, and but just a little bit of talk, why you doing this, that kind of thing. And then after that, James goes to the youth home to start the mentorship thing. He tells him, "I'm back. I told you I would do it." And Robert, they talk a little bit. Robert asks him, does he believe in God? That's his first wonder. James says, "Yeah." They talk a little bit where Robert gets up and walks away. Then you're at James' house again. Him and Philip are talking about things, and James is telling him about the mentorship. And Philip is also talking about his daughter not hooking up with a boy like Robert, which is funny. Then you're back at the youth home, and James walks up, and Robert is sitting there reading, and now they talk a little bit. Robert tells a little bit about his life. James tells something about his life, and Robert asks him about women, and James responds in how he respects women, so on and so forth. And so then, they start to connect just a tad. And James is back at his home. They go from there to, he's back at his house. Bubba calls and says, "Hey, can you pick him up on Saturday?" Which is different than usually when he comes by on Thursday. Yeah, he got a few places to go. And James says, yeah, they do it. And so Robert and James go to the barber shop, They go to a clothing store, all in the same block. And this guy tries to grab James's bag, kind of startles James. But Robert jumps in and he punches the guy real quickly. And, James is like taken back by, Robert's response. Just didn't know how. And then he wonders, hey, how you learn how to be that, be the way you are, and so on and so forth. So now you can see him clicking. And then they, are riding in the car. It's the same day, and they go to James' house. And Robert is amazed at how nice the house looks. They go inside, and Robert is looking around the house. And Robert, one of the good things about it, he looks and he sees this Black History book. There's a lot of Black History books and things throughout the house. There's Afrocentric decor. And he sees this one book, and they talk about the book and what the book is about. James, shares a personal story about how his dad would tell him about his great grandfather escaping slavery. And Robert is there to paint the bathroom, and he also shows him how to tie a tie at this point. And so Philip and the two friends, co-workers, or one co-worker and a friend, they come by at this point because James wanted them to meet Robert. And so they come and they meet Robert, and his best friend meets Robert and his best friend daughter. And they take a little liking, the daughter and Robert, and they end up going out with the dad to the movies. And then from there, that's how all of them meet Robert. And then from that point, they the two young ladies talk in the driveway after leaving James' house, and one of them says to the other, "Hey, I see you and James, making a good couple." And some time had gone by. It's probably about 6 months later at this point. And so she says, "I ain't have nothing to do with dating him. He just got, went through all of what he went through." And at the same time, he's now, asking the young lady to look through his, wife's clothes, and she does that. And now it's a connection between the two kids. And two kids talk. And he finished painting the bathroom. And then you go from there to Robert. Then they at the coffee shop. Behind all that, James, his sister, and brother. And they talking about different things, and about James is telling them about how this mentorship thing is going at that point. And she talks about her promotion. And then you go to Robert and his mother sitting in the kitchen at their home. Robert can go home on the weekends. And while sitting there, he tells her that he's got a mentor, and she talks about things happening around the, with an older brother having to go back to jail for a few months, and how she's feeling, and so on and so forth. And also about why her and the father divorced, because the father is gay, Robert's father, closet gay. The wife really didn't know, but, found out, and, so on and so forth. So that's that's what happens there. Now we have James's backyard. Robert, they're exercising, they're doing things together, talking about playing football. And they also talk about changing spark plugs in the car. he shows him how to do that. And then they go inside the house. James is now, a little tipsy. Well, he's having some health issues starting to creep up. And so this is where you first see that happening. Some of it maybe not from the drinking, but some other things that's happening to him. And then kind of sidebar to April and a girlfriend of hers talking. And April, the best friend's daughter, is telling the girlfriend how she, kind of got a liking for Robert. And then now Robert is at James's house. A little bit after that, they're really connecting, and he's telling him what he's going to do for the summer, and that he, what he's thinking about doing as a career path. And they talk about shooting pool and things of that sort. End up playing dominoes. He meets Philip. Not for the first time, but Philip comes over and they chit chat, and so on and so forth, and light talk at that point. And then Robert and April are, kind of hanging out, and they go to a party store. Some guy hits on April. Robert goes to punch the dude out, but he doesn't. And April likes that how Robert had restraint, because he don't, like say, he fights quite often in the movie. And then you go Robert and James again, they're exercising, because they both, well, James, he was kind of a exercise guy, so on and so forth. And going over what's going on in Robert's life and what he wants to do in the future. And then they go inside the house to hear some music, play some music. And then James' best friend brings his daughter and some lady over. He always got some ladies in mind. And they, doing some dancing and that kind of thing. And then that goes on for a little bit. And then Robert says he's got to leave because some of his boys is coming to pick him up so he can go play basketball. And so that, they watch him out, watch him leave through the window. The boys are in the car. One of the guys talk about smoking some weed. He pulls out a joint, and a police car pass them, and they can see the joint. And they make a U-turn, they follow him. They get out the car, going at the parking lot of the basketball courts, and the police pull the flasher on them and harass them, and take the book bag that Robert is holding, because that has the basketball in it, from the guy who was in the car with him, who went back to the car, and they kind of went ahead. And so, Robert gets caught up in that, and they frisk him. Robert's got a little knife on him, but it's nothing major. But nonetheless, please take it to the extreme. And at the result of that, James gets a call, has to come to the U-phone because Robert is in this trouble. He gets arrested, but they let him go. Don't hold him for too long, and go through all the scenarios. And Vern, the U-phone director, says, "Hey, we're gonna have to stop this relationship for a while." And James really kind of goes overboard almost. You can see that in his actions. And he bumps into Robert, like he wanted to give him a whooping or something like that. And Robert ends up stabbing him with a pencil or punching him or something. But James falls and hits his head. And so you have a pretty dramatic scene there. And then the white guy, the assistant director, who's watching all this happen, who's in the room with him, he immediately reacts and goes over and he punches Robert, knocks him down, from the scene. Robert gets up and runs out of the building. And then when he runs, he goes to the park and he calls April, the girlfriend. She comes to meet him and he tells her, hey, he doesn't explain all that happens, but that, he's in a little trouble and won't be able to see her for a while. And then he goes back to the youth home and, he tells his buddy, hey, what do you know about all this? And the guy explains that. And Robert, he's there. And then this is when he writes in his journal about, man, he's all, look at how he just can't control himself type thing. And then Bubba and Vern do a little talking, and Vern, the director, says, hey, this thing got ugly, and how he, just got to deal with it. That same night, James is at home and his girlfriend now, Marcia, is there and she's caring for him and so on. And Philip shows up and, really saying, hey, I told you so, you shouldn't have done this in the beginning. And James takes responsibility for overreacting and for causing some of this. And now you can see a little bit about how he is really, the alcohol is kind of taking hold, and also whatever his health ailment that you don't know about just yet, but how something is happening in his health. And so, he, at that point, James says, hey, I'm gonna stick with this. I'm too far gone now. And then at that point, James is at the house. A little bit of time has gone by. And Bubba calls to check on him and see how he's doing. And he's, James says, hey, well, can I talk to the guy? He says, no, man, can't talk to him. Maybe you run into him, but that's the end of that. And then some months pass by at that point, and Robert is in the park, and April, they hadn't seen in months. She shows up and tells him how, she's so mad at him, but, she's still been thinking about him over the time. And he says, well, hey, I'll be graduating soon. And I want you to come to the graduation. And I want James to come. She says, well, that's on you. You got to call him and stuff like that. And at that point, he writes in his journal again. But how he's moving forward. James is at the house next. And little surprise, the youth home assistant director, Bubba, shows up at the house. And Bubba is like, hey, I was wondering, would you like to see James? And, I'm checking on you first, but would you like to see Robert? And he says, yeah. Well, Robert is outside. They come in and they reconnect. And the best friend comes, and he sees Robert, and things have just gone well. That Robert also introduced that him and the best friend's daughter have been dating secretly, in contact, so on and so forth. And then they go from there, and everything is going good. Even the best friend says, it's gone so well, I want to be a mentor now, see how good it is. And, it's kind of a funny scene there. You go from that to, things worked out. And then at that point, you see Robert in his cap and gown, his graduation time, so on and so forth. Then Marsha's at the house and they're checking on him. And now checking on James, now his health issues are coming to light, and they got to go to the hospital. And they check on him. He finds out he has prostate cancer at this point. Robert comes over, he's checking on him. He tells Robert he has prostate cancer too at this point, what he's doing to try to get better. Then James and the girlfriend meet at the coffee shop, and they chit chat for a little bit about doing some things together. And then Robert has been invited to move in with James at this point. And he does. And then you see a scene of them, Robert walking in and checking on him, talking about how things go. And James tells him that he got to go to the doctor and so on and so forth. And how they've really connected. Hey, James is at the doctor's office, and at this point, it is found that the cancer has spread, and he got to go to the hospital, James. So now he's at the hospital right after that, and he's looking bad. Things have taken a turn for the worse for him. And all the family are there, so on and so forth. And then you see scenes of Robert sitting by the hospital bed. There's like 2, 3 of those, just sitting there, and James is in the bed, can't talk much. You see reflections of the things that the two of them have done together over the year and a half, let's say. And then the next one is everybody's there, and James dies. And Robert writes in his journal, and then it closes by Robert being at a park, and he sees a little boy playing by himself, and he looks back at talks to the mom. The mom says, yeah, you don't hear them talking, that, he can, play catch with him. And then he looks back at the camera and as if he's saying, hey, I'm gonna be his mentor. And that's the end of the movie. That's Foot Soldiers.